Why would the parents of a 14-year-old girl allow their daughter to meet a 24-year-old sex symbol at his home? Priscilla later created the fiction, perpetuated in nearly all Elvis folklore, that her father and mother were extremely strict and opposed the meeting with Elvis, perhaps partly because she was embarrassed what kind of parents would consent, and partly because her parents' enthusiasm about the meeting and were not consistent with the proper image she would present once her association with Elvis made her famous. And what makes this, what makes me more inclined to believe CURRIE's accounts of events over Priscilla's is just the fact that when you think about it, what would CURRIE have, what would he stand to gain other than looking just completely disgusting in admitting all of this? Priscilla, in my opinion, has so much more to lose in the way of losing her treasured narrative and reputation and this idea that she was a prim and proper girl. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jennifer, so happy to have you back for chapter 9 of Child Bride by Suzanne Finstad. So in chapter 8, we talked about the fated meeting between Priscilla Beaulieu and a man that she met in Germany named CURRIE Grant. And CURRIE Grant was the man who eventually led Priscilla to Elvis. CURRIE knew Elvis, was a friend of Elvis's, and eventually brought Priscilla to meet Elvis. Now, as you know, if you have been watching the series, and if you know anything about that fateful meeting between CURRIE and Priscilla, there are very different accounts. Priscilla's and CURRIE's. Priscilla has her account that she has maintained that she did not know who CURRIE was, that she really wasn't that huge of an Elvis fan, that CURRIE was a stranger to her when he approached her in Germany shortly upon arriving in the country, and then that's what led her to Elvis. CURRIE, as we know from the last episode, maintains a very different story, and he says that she knew of him and eventually, after a few conversations, approached him wanting to meet Elvis. So there's all these little discrepancies, all these nuanced details that are hotly contested between the two. And in chapter 9 of Faustian Bargain, it gets a lot more upsetting and it gets a lot deeper. And I just want to get into the chapter, and we will discuss as we go and discuss more after the chapter's over, because it is a very upsetting chapter given how old Priscilla was, 14 years old, when all of this was taking place. So if you want to know the lead up to this chapter, if you want to know exactly how Priscilla met CURRIE and how Priscilla's account and CURRIE's account are two very different things, watch the last episode, chapter 8. I will link it somewhere, but let's get going with this one. Chapter 9 of Faustian Bargain. CURRIE Grant was toying with Priscilla Beaulieu, not certain whether he would bring her to meet Elvis Presley. In my mind, I said, now I've got her, he recalled, like a spider assessing a fly. I thought, she wants something. She wants me to do a favor for her, but now I've got her, because she's coming to me. Priscilla Beaulieu and CURRIE Grant had mutually compatible goals. CURRIE was Priscilla's ticket to Elvis, and Priscilla was CURRIE's passport to bliss. CURRIE studied his prey, making small talk and asking Priscilla a few critical questions, including her age. When she said 14, I almost fell off my chair, he remembered. I look older, don't I? He recalled Priscilla responding nonchalantly. Her tender age, however, did not deter either of them. CURRIE began stringing Priscilla along, saying he might be able to take her to Elvis's house, making arrangements to meet her at the club several more times. This went on, CURRIE estimated, for roughly a week. However, I have to mention that, as we learned in chapter 8, the author of Child Bride, Suzanne Finstad, talks about how Priscilla's account of when she met CURRIE around that time, even her story tends to change over the years. Suzanne talks about just 3 different ways that Priscilla describes meeting him. In one way, it's like, he walked up to her and said his name was Johnny Appleseed. And in another account, Priscilla says she had never seen him before. He was a stark stranger to her when he walked up to her. And then in another account, it's like, I knew him. I knew who he was, and I knew he was around at the club. So it's just all these little things. And unlike Priscilla, CURRIE's account and his telling of the story, how he met her, has not changed. And this book was written in 1997, so almost 4 decades later, Currie's still saying and telling the same story. So just important for that to be mentioned. Hold on, guys. Let me put my glasses on really quick. Okay. Currie, he had brought a young girl with whom he was having an affair to Elvis's house. When they got to Bad Nauheim, Elvis took a fancy to Currie's date and took her to his bedroom. By the time she left, she had lost all interest in Currie. Once she had been with him, you can forget about doing anything, he recalled. If he hoped to get anywhere with Priscilla, he figured it would have to occur before she met Elvis, if he took her to his house. When Priscilla informed him late in the week that she had already told her mother about the proposed visit, Currie called Anne Beaulieu shortly thereafter. Priscilla's mother was delighted. Now, before we go further, I just wanted to mention quickly that there is a channel here on YouTube. Elvis Presley's first cousin, Donna Presley, she has her own channel. And on her channel, she describes her experiences growing up as a Presley. She describes her relationship with her first cousin, Elvis. By all accounts, it seemed to be a very loving and wonderful relationship. Her mother was named Gladys Presley, and Gladys was Vernon's sister. So Donna's mother and Elvis's father were brother and sister. So that's how Donna is Elvis's first cousin. And she just seems to be a very gracious, very kind, and obviously very knowledgeable about the Presley family. And it's very important for her to preserve Elvis's legacy. Now, I did watch a video on Donna Presley's channel where she addresses the fact that there are a lot of people out there that are very upset that Elvis was dating Priscilla when Priscilla was 14 years old. And given the fact that there's been so much in the news lately, you know, in light of the Epstein files, that there has been new allegations coming up about Elvis saying that he was a ophile. And Donna is very, very staunch in her defense of Elvis, saying that, you know, Elvis lived with his father and his grandmother in Germany, in the house that he was living in Germany. And by Donna's accounts of the situation, she says that their grandmother ran a very, very strict and tight Christian household, meaning that there was no way that Elvis would be bringing women, girls to his bedroom while living in that house. That is what Donna Presley says in defense of Elvis. So I just, aspects of fairness, just wanted to bring that up as we read the chapter, because obviously there's a lot of different accounts of all of this time, this, very sensitive and famous time when Priscilla was meeting and getting to know Elvis in Germany. Okay, so moving on. Priscilla's mother was delighted and suggested that Currie and his wife Carol stop by for coffee and dessert. Contrary to legend, neither Anne nor Paul Beaulieu exhibited the slightest hesitation about sending their not quite ninth grade daughter to meet Elvis Presley, according to both Carol and Currie Grant. The father didn't say much. The mother wanted it real bad because Priscilla wanted it real bad. Why would the parents of a 14-year-old girl allow their daughter to meet a 24-year-old sex symbol at his home? Priscilla later created the fiction, perpetuated in nearly all Elvis folklore, that her father and mother were extremely strict and opposed the meeting with Elvis, perhaps partly because she was embarrassed what kind of parents would consent, and partly because her parents' enthusiasm about the meeting and were not consistent with the proper image she would present once her association with Elvis made her famous. In reality, Anne Beaulieu was an accessory before the fact in her daughter's girlish quest to meet Elvis Presley. Her daughter's infatuation with Elvis, moreover, must have struck an emotional chord in Anne. How could she not be reminded of herself at just past 14, sneaking out of the house to date a handsome, dark-haired, older man in uniform? Anne was also starstruck, for she had been drawn to Elvis Presley since the family's Del Val days. That was when they were living in Texas before they moved to Germany. And in earlier chapters, the author of Child Bride, Suzanne, she relays about how Anne, when Elvis had released the movie Love Me Tender, had invited all of her then girlfriends in Texas to go see Elvis Presley on the big screen, that Anne Beaulieu herself was kind of starstruck with Elvis and thought he was pretty fabulous. So Just very interesting. And again, countering the narrative that Pricilla has been presenting to the public for decades, that, her parents were prim and proper, very stern, very strict, and they wanted nothing to do with the rock and roll or Elvis, and they weren't even fans. And this is all being contradicted here because remember, I've said it before, I'll say it again, Suzanne interviewed over 300 people for this book who knew Pricilla way back in the day. I mean, if you were watching earlier episodes of this series, she was talking to her second grade teacher. That's how far back Suzanne went. Pretty crazy. Okay, where are we? During the Grant's get acquainted conversation with the Beaulieus, it was not a question of if Anne would let Pricilla go, recalled CURRIE. It was rather a question of when I would take her. CURRIE left the house without setting a date for the big night. He wished to perpetuate his amorous game with Priscilla Beaulieu a while longer, capitalizing on his connection to the king. During their next conversation at the club, he set the trap. I told her we'd have to be alone. Priscilla at first demurred, CURRIE recalled. She told him her parents knew he was married. Well, somehow we've got to be alone, he insisted. I can't stand it. Priscilla then came up with a plan, according to CURRIE. CURRIE could ask her parents' permission to take her to a movie with him and Carol. Then he could tell his wife he had to work late, pick Priscilla up alone, and tell her mother and father they would collect Carol on their way to the theater. That was her idea, not mine, CURRIE said. I thought, man, that was pretty provocative. So CURRIE is 27 years old at the time, because in the last chapter we learned he was 3 years older than Elvis. So this is a 27-year-old trying to date Priscilla. First night they were alone. After we got into the hills, all she wanted to do was talk about Elvis. Finally, I just reached over and kissed her. She didn't really resist, but she didn't really want to do it. I wasn't used to people being that way, stiff, and I let it go. There was nothing I could do but talk to her about Elvis. CURRIE persisted in trying to kiss Priscilla until she finally got used to it. After about half an hour, there was nothing to it, and we would talk in between. As the evening progressed, he counseled her as to how to behave if he did decide to take her to meet Elvis. I'd seen him meet about 15 girls up to that point. If you started talking too much, asking too many questions, it bothered him. I advised her not to talk too much, to be very quiet and demure. Don't tell him how much you like his records or his movies. Just be quiet and let him ask the questions. You'll get along with him a lot better. So this is CURRIE dispensing advice to Priscilla for when she meets Elvis. That first evening ended on a note of frustration for both. I wouldn't even touch her, so I just let it go. But she was ready to go out the next time. CURRIE did not mention Priscilla to Elvis during those first days and weeks when he was setting the stage for his own seduction. He was aware that the rock and roll star was attracted to younger women. Earlier that year, Elvis had become involved with a 16-year-old Brigitte Bardot lookalike from Frankfurt named Margit Bürgen, and he began dating a young German girl named Helene Primel in August. Margit Bürgen had aborted Elvis's child a few months before, unknown to Elvis. He also had misgivings because of her age. 16 was one thing. 14 was quite another, and he still had designs on Priscilla himself. Now, I had not heard about this Margit Bürgen woman ever in any of the biographies or anything that I've read about Elvis. Obviously, this is some source that Suzanne Finstad is talking to. Who knows if that is actually true or not. That's just what's here in the book. And even CURRIE knows that it's very dangerous territory, though, with Priscilla, because she's 14 and, 16 is one thing, but 14 is quite another. And what makes me more inclined to believe CURRIE's accounts of events over Priscilla's is just the fact that when you think about it, what would CURRIE have, what would he stand to gain other than looking just completely disgusting in admitting all of this? I mean, why would he admit to this if this was indeed true, his account? I mean, a 27-year-old married man with 2 small children trying to carry on an affair with Priscilla and, knowing that he could kind of just use her, so to speak, do what he wanted with her because he knew that she was desperate to meet Elvis. Pricilla, in my opinion, has so much more to lose in the way of losing her treasured narrative and reputation and this idea that she was a prim and proper girl. So it's all just very, very cloudy and very, very murky and not a good situation on either side. But I do have to say that just based on everything that I know about Priscilla's accounts and CURRIE's accounts and the extensive research that Suzanne did on this, it just leads me to believe that I do think that there is more truth to CURRIE's account, unfortunately, and that is just my opinion. By his own admission, CURRIE was taking advantage of his connection to Elvis, using himself as bait for Priscilla to fulfill her fantasy of meeting the rock star. Oh, absolutely, CURRIE confessed. I don't deny that at all. All the guys around Elvis would say the same thing. They get the leftovers that Elvis can't get to or doesn't want. I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you what the facts are. I felt really bad, but I wanted Priscilla to be with her more. I mean, see what I mean? It just makes him look like a total snake. And, obviously, even back then in the 50s, there were laws governing this type of thing, and he knew that she was too young. So, yeah. CURRIE and Priscilla parked in the hills a second time, sometime that late summer or early fall. These rendezvous were their secret, and secrecy was a concept with which Priscilla was intimate. I told her several times, whatever we say or do, it always stays between you and me, and she agreed. And again, this goes back to Priscilla's secretive nature that was formed in her childhood. Because remember back in chapter 6, when the author was telling us a story about how Priscilla found out about her birth father, how that secret had been kept from her, and how her mother was just, seized with fear that Priscilla would tell her stepfather because they were so worried about the fragile ego of Paul Beaulieu, Priscilla's stepfather, because it seemed to Priscilla, with the dramatic and overwrought way that Anne reacted to it, like, begging and pleading with Priscilla, don't tell your stepfather, don't tell your stepfather. It just seemed that she was just seized with this fearful reaction. And Priscilla had that choice to make, and she just learned that, you keep secrets, you maintain the status quo, you just shut yourself off emotionally. And this is showing and manifesting here in the way that this grown man is using this 14-year-old girl. And I mean, honestly, that's really all she knows is just keeping secrets. So here we have a situation where you've got a grown man taking advantage of a 14-year-old girl, which, people can say what they want about Priscilla as an adult, but in this particular instance, she was not in charge of what happened to her. I mean, you could say she was, but she really wasn't. She didn't have the adult reasoning faculties to make proper choices for herself, period. And her parents should have protected her. Priscilla, according to CURRIE, would have done anything to meet Elvis Presley. By their fourth encounter in the hills, she had given herself sexually to CURRIE. She did everything humanly possible to please me on that fourth time. It was then that CURRIE Grant made his decision to bring Priscilla Beaulieu to meet Elvis Presley. I felt sorry for her because she had tried so hard to please me. Had CURRIE told Priscilla he would take her to Elvis's house, and she became a little aggressive herself. I know, I'm sorry, you guys. This is pretty grave. As they were driving back to the Beaulieus, CURRIE became aroused again and pulled the car to a dark spot near the Wiesbaden Museum. And this German police car with a big Polizei on the side, a green Volkswagen, I'll never forget it, caught us a block from her house. It scared the living hell out of me. The windows were all steamed up. We got caught before we got into the act itself. I thought they'd put me in prison. She was a minor. I was in the Air Force. Her father was in the Air Force. But the German policeman was such a nice guy. If it had been the American police, I might have been dead. The cop said, you better be careful and take her on home. Can you imagine what had happened if that German policeman had done his job and had protected Priscilla and had thrown CURRIE's ass in jail? She never would have met Elvis, and history would have been very, very different. Now, again, you guys, I know, I'm sorry. This is a very, very disturbing chapter. But it doesn't get better. Not only was Priscilla Beaulieu not a virgin on her wedding night, as she would later claim, but she was not a virgin when she met Elvis Presley. According to Currie, Priscilla did not... Oh, wait, hold on. I'm not going to read this sentence because it's particularly graphic, but when you have your first relations, there are things that sometimes happen, and Currie alludes to the fact that that did not happen in his first encounter with Priscilla, so it leads Currie to wonder whether or not she was indeed a virgin. Let's just put it that way. Raised the question of whether she had already gone all the way, perhaps with one of the faster, older boys she associated with when she was in the 8th grade. Currie doubted it, since she seemed so green, but it might explain her willingness to have intercourse to further the Elvis dream, since she wouldn't have been a virgin anyway. I know. Priscilla vehemently denied Currie's account in May of 1996. May God strike me dead if that ever happened to me. I am telling you, on the life of my son and my daughter, that never happened. This man is a liar. Now, remember, we found out in the last episode that Currie and Priscilla met at the author of Child Bride's home, Suzanne Finstad. They met at her home, May 1996. They're arguing this entire story. So if you didn't catch the last episode, just pause and go watch it. Just do that. Yeah, so Priscilla's calling him a liar. And Priscilla maintained that she did not go out with Currie even once on the guise of going to a movie. Currie stood his ground. Her story was for her family and her good name. She wants to try to keep it clean. She wants to control the things around her life and Scientology, and she can't do that with me. Did I have intercourse with Priscilla? Yes, I had intercourse with Priscilla more than once that last night, but not after she started going with Elvis. Priscilla and Currie fought over this point in their face-to-face encounter at my home on May 14th, 1996. Currie, you and I started going in the hills once a week together. Priscilla, oh, Currie, please. Currie, you know that's not true. Currie, she's a great actress, isn't she? Priscilla, you cannot look me in the eye and say we went somewhere in the hills. Currie, I'm looking at you right in the face. Honey, we made love somewhere in the hills. Priscilla, oh my gosh, do you think for 1 minute I would make love to you? Currie, you did it and you were glad to do it. Before I ever took you to meet Elvis, you did that. Priscilla, you got the wrong girl, Currie. Currie, no, I've got the right girl. I'm talking about this little girl sitting right here. Right here. Priscilla, I'm sitting here and it's your word against mine. Currie, that's the reason I took you to meet Elvis, because we did make love. So this is like he said, she said 101. I mean, and there's no one there to verify either of their stories. It's just these two going at it. But again, we see how his story's never wavered and hers has changed over the years. Okay, so the author continues, no one but Priscilla and Currie could know what happened between them. Currie did not tell anyone he was trysting with Priscilla that summer. She was 14. Just as predictably, Priscilla's parents denied that she left the house with Currie 4 times to see a movie. As before, with the who asked whom to meet Elvis debate, there are gaps and inconsistencies in Priscilla's version. She generally claims that she was introduced to Elvis as soon as she got to Germany, within 2 weeks, according to a 1996 interview. Yet more recently, she said that Currie watched her for 3 weeks before he invited her to meet Elvis. In a third version in her book, she recounted that Currie watched her for several days, invited her to meet Elvis, and then spent several weeks with her parents before the meeting occurred. All of these versions cannot be true. According to 2 of her own versions of the story, there was unaccounted for time. What were she and Currie doing during those undefined several weeks between their meeting and the introduction to Elvis? Priscilla later discussed Currie Grant with Mike Edwards, her lover of 7 years. She told Mike that she and Currie created a ruse for her parents of going to the movies, but instead drove into the Wiesbaden Hills. Mike recalled Priscilla telling him. Now, this is Priscilla telling her then boyfriend Mike Edwards about it. By Priscilla's own account to Mike, she and Currie did sneak to the hills and engage in some kind of sexual activity, which led to an introduction to Elvis. The aspect that did not make sense to Mike was that Priscilla depicted herself as unwilling. Mike also thought that Priscilla did have intercourse with Currie. I always believed it, but she always denied it. But the story that she laid out to me doesn't add up. Doesn't add up. As Mike Edwards noted, I don't think he would be so foolish as to say something like that if it wasn't true. In retrospect, Currie was not proud of his behavior. I can't believe I risked my marriage and my career in the Air Force to fool around with a 14-year-old girl. It was crazy. I was just in overdrive when it came to sex. I was an addict. Anyway, that's the way it was. So that is the end of chapter 9. The next chapter is going to be chapter 10, and it's called Imagine If the Fantasy Comes True. Now, I told you this one was going to be a difficult one to read. I mean, it really, really is, because there really is no other way to come away from this type of thing and not see Priscilla as the victim in this entire situation. And I will say, as a lifelong Elvis fan myself, I love Elvis's music. I have always been a fan, and it is difficult now as a grown woman in her 50s reading this, and also knowing that she did enter into a relationship with Elvis at 14. Of course, that's difficult to wrap your head around. And I look at someone like Currie and I look at someone like Elvis, and I do see their intentions to be distinctly different. You know, we know that Elvis ended up marrying Priscilla, that he did have honorable intentions towards Priscilla, whereas Currie was already a married man cheating on his wife with her, and she's 14. And yes, we all know that definitely if something like that were found out today about how old Priscilla was at the time Elvis met her, that it would be a whole completely different scenario. So again, you know, we have to acknowledge that yes, there are disturbing aspects about their age difference, and it's just something that we have to acknowledge. Do I find Elvis's character to be the same as a Currie Grant's? Absolutely not. Is there an excuse for Elvis carrying on that relationship with her? You know, by today's standards, absolutely not. So it's just a difficult situation all around to wrap your head around, really. And I mentioned before about Donna Presley, who has staunchly defended her cousin Elvis and has said that there would never have been any way for any type of hanky-panky like that to be going on in the home that Elvis shared with his father and his grandmother while he lived in Germany. So you have Donna's account of the situation. By Priscilla's own account in her book, she was a virgin when she married Elvis on their wedding night. You have Currie's account. You have all these different situations, all these different factors. And, you know, it might sound naive to say, but in my heart of hearts, I don't really feel that Elvis was a predatory man. I don't feel that he was predatory in the sense of, say, a Currie Grant. Seeing Priscilla, I do think that he saw her as the girl that he would eventually marry. There's just a lot to unpack here. And I'm going to contradict myself a bit in this argument, just a little bit. But for example, when we were talking earlier in earlier episodes about the fact that Priscilla's mother and stepfather kept the identity of her real birth father, and I really took that to task. I did not like that. I felt that that was deceptive, and I felt that that created unnecessary trauma for Priscilla. And there were people in my comments that were saying that, you know, that was the way that it was back then. People just weren't as open about that type of stuff, and it's not really fair of me to look at that and judge that with a lens of today, when it was, you know, the more kind of prudish 1950s. And I said in response to that, you know, the right thing is the right thing. So I don't really buy into that argument. So I guess if someone was disturbed about the fact that Priscilla was 14 when she met Elvis and when they began a relationship, that it wouldn't be fair for me to say that in the instance of Priscilla's parents, but not to apply that to Elvis. But then again, you also have to remember that, you know, decades ago, people were a lot younger when they did get married. Like, for example, my grandparents came from the Ukraine to Canada. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, came to Canada with her parents, with her baby brother, who was like 1 year old, and she was about 2.5 in 1903. And when she was 14 years old, she got married. It was an arranged marriage between the Ukrainian families in the little town that they grew up in Manitoba, Canada. She got married to my grandfather, who was, I believe, 23 or 24 at the time. So, and it was an arranged marriage in a church, all very, on the up and up, arranged between the families. But that's just the way it was. So younger women got married to older men. Of course, my grandfather was a wonderful, upright, honest man who treated my grandmother very well. They went on to have 8 children, 7 of which lived, and big loving family. My mom grew up in a wonderful household. So his intentions toward my grandmother were honorable. So there are different variances, in my opinion, in this situation. I don't feel it's the same as concealing the identity of a birth father from a child. That, in my eyes, is never right. But there are different nuances and there are different things. Of course, I'd be lying if I said it didn't bother me about Priscilla's age when she first met Elvis and first began a relationship with him. But again, there's so many different accounts. Some people are saying, like his cousin Donna Presley, that it was all on the up and up, that there was no way that, there'd be hanky-panky going on. Priscilla seems to substantiate this in every recollection she's ever given. She's always maintained she was an innocent on their wedding night. And then you got CURRIE talking here. There's all these different things, all different things we need to consider and look at. But point being, I think in my heart of hearts, I do not believe that Elvis was a unseemly predator that was just out to, defile every young girl he met or anything like that. But, you read the account of a CURRIE, and by his own admission, he really does seem like that type of person. So I don't know. I don't want to make it seem to you guys like I'm trying to justify behavior or explain away behavior or make someone seem like, the devil incarnate and, Priscilla to be one way and CURRIE to be the other way, and Elvis is just, there's just so much. So it's just a lot. It is a lot to unpack, but let me know what you guys think about all of this mess down in the comments below. We're going to get into this situation now coming up in chapter 10. We haven't even got to Priscilla meeting Elvis yet. So all this is just, it's a tangled web. It is a tangled web. There are so many people out there in the Elvis fandom world that really believe that it wasn't a good thing for Elvis to meet Priscilla, that she wasn't the woman for him, and they will just point to the fact that her narrative changes all the time. So all we can do is just listen to her narrative, listen to the people that are still left, like Donna Presley of Elvis's family, read the accounts that Suzanne has accumulated from everyone that knew Priscilla and everyone that she interviewed to try to get a better picture and a better understanding of all these players involved. It is a big, big tangled web. But, I pray for the soul of Elvis. I do believe at his heart, kind of like Errol Flynn. If you watched my series that I did on Errol Flynn, although Errol was quite the scoundrel and much more worldly and just more, I don't know, I was going to say debaucherous than Elvis. But, Elvis was just a kind, sweet soul that came from just super, super humble beginnings, family man, super generous, immense talent. Most people that speak of him, even today after his death, by all accounts, just a generous, sweet soul and man. So he did make his mistakes in his life, but he is someone that is also on my prayer list, and I hope he is with our Lord in heaven, because at his heart and soul, I do believe that he was a good man and didn't really mean anybody any real harm. So, I always know that there's going to be people that are going to come for me in the comments saying, well, if you're going to paint CURRIE as the devil, then why not Elvis? Well, again, in my humble opinion, I think they had vastly different intentions when it came to Priscilla. But again, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I know this has been a deep one and disturbing, but we haven't even got to when Priscilla meets Elvis yet. So we're going to get into that in the next one. I hope to see you on that episode. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye.